Welcome to the first session that we're doing for cracking data science interviews. And I am really excited to have Daniel Lee with us today. He is a founder of DataInterview.com, which I'm sure many of you guys would have learned about. And he is also an ex data scientist from Google. So thank you so much for being here with us, Dan.
No, thank you for letting me, become a guest in this, talk show. So I'm pretty excited to share my stories and that can be really helpful for your viewers.
Yes, absolutely. I've been following a lot of your posts that you've done on LinkedIn, and I find them to be very good content for somebody who's preparing for interviews. And that's what a lot of folks are looking forward to in Illuminate AI community. And I thought it'll be a great opportunity for them to learn from you. And not wasting too much time, I'll probably want to start about you and um, what was your role looking like when you were at Google, and how was your experience, and what all did you learn from Google?
Yeah, definitely. So I worked at Google for, apologize. If I talk and cough, I've experienced some bronchitis the past couple of weeks. Fortunately, I'm sort of well beyond the, like any sort of serious issue or anything like that. But I've had some cough issues, so definitely not COVID, just because I've been tested and stuff like that. So please excuse me if I cough here and there. So for for at Google, I worked there for almost 2 years, placed within the finance org. And I did all kinds of stuff related to basically like financial data, from like time series forecasting to building out, to working with a colleague and build out like an anomaly detection system, to doing like revenue revenue analytics, where we were trying to kind of understand, if you have a revenue from previous year to revenue this year, what are the underlying factors that would drive the revenue change, and be able to kind of explain that to stakeholders. So the team that I was on was a very like horizontal focused sort of team, and so we worked with, Google being like a conglomeration of all these different businesses and product areas. There were various FP&A teams, like various financial and planning and analysis teams that were kind of using not so like sophisticated way to do like financial forecasting analysis and those sort of things. So that's where they tapped into data scientists like myself to kind of build more sort of robust statistical methodology as a way to kind of serve them. So that's what I did for about 2 years.
That is amazing, Dan. And I really want to know your, your motivation behind building something like DataInterview.com. And you'll be surprised. Like I've learned from like a lot of my friends that they have been using the platform, and they have
Awesome.
just gotten their dream jobs while they prepared using your platform.
Yeah, definitely. So this really started with like myself. I've, over the course of 5 years of being a data scientist, like I've gone through interview process multiple times after graduating from college in 2016, um, with BS in statistics, and then doing like a active job search, excuse me, job search in like 2017, and then once again 2019. And every couple of years, every time I'm doing job search and I Google search like, data scientist interview prep, those sort of things, I couldn't find good resources out there. Like I found a couple like Medium articles and maybe some YouTube videos and here and there, but I couldn't really find the type of content that really generalized to the actual type of interview process, along with the interview questions that are asked in these these top companies that were interviewing me, from like, Apple, Facebook, and yada yada yada. So I just felt like it was like a big black box. And so that's why like in 2018, when I started doing this sort of like active job hunt again, and then toward like 2019, when I was basically going on interviews and stuff like that, that's when I just sort of thought to myself, you know what, why don't I create my own little playbook, my strategy book, like have like Excel spreadsheet, keep track of like all the companies that are interviewing me, what's the funnel process, along with questions that they're asking, and kind of think about how do you approach these type of interview questions effectively, right? So I spent time kind of trying to think about how can I actually serve myself first, right? Like if I could make my life easy through these sort of interview process, like what does that look like, right? So I started really building out some frameworks that can be really helpful for myself, and ultimately it helped me, land my dream job at as a data scientist at Google. And then from there, I've sort of kind of thought about doing this on the side, helping, of course, like helping friends here and there prepare for data science interviews. And had like a few sort of reach out to me and, helped them like land data scientist roles at FANG companies. So that's when I sort of knew that, okay, you know what, like I think I can actually build a business out of this. And so that's why, around like toward the end of last year, like 2020, that's when I kind of did like a more like a full launch of the business itself and started helping people kind of break into the data scientist roles. And now I'm sort of in the process of helping other, soon enough, I'll also sort of scale to other roles within data, roles that are, data specific, whether it's like data engineering, machine learning engineering, or data analysis and those sort of things.
That is really amazing, Dan. Like I totally resonate with one of the things that you mentioned in your videos was framing method. And I was like, this is so true. Like this always like happens to me wherever I'm like learning something, I really want to, reflect it off somebody or like through a post or like through giving a session, or I just like make my friends sit in front of me and I explain them that topic. So do you want to just like mention that method? Like I find it to be very useful. So maybe you want to just give a quick glimpse on that method.
Yeah, certainly. So when candidates are approaching these business case problems, like, how do you measure success on, let's just say like Instagram or something like that, right? More often than not, what candidates will often do is like they will kind of have a very vague sense about how they're going to approach it, and often they might end up kind of rambling, and that can be somewhat consequential, just because so the interviewer is sort of looking for, given that you have this very vague open-ended problem, can you kind of refine it in a very structured format, right? And candidates often struggle with that because they don't know a direction in which, like, like how do you sort of approach this type of problem. So, in these sort of impromptu setting, you have to think about how can you actually provide a structured response. And this is where knowing some like framework as a way to sort of approach it can be really helpful. So like using Feynman method as a way to sort of explain, just practice explaining things out loud. That is really incredibly helpful. So that's something that I did quite often. Like I had like an index card of, basically I created like an index cards with like questions, and I was just sort of going through this like almost every day. It's just kind of explaining to myself, okay, this is how I'm going to explain, how to measure success on Instagram, or even like kind of definition based type of, interview questions, like, what is a variance and bias trade off, right? And just sort of explain that to myself out loud. It really helped me, do well, like in the like the oral portions of the interview.
That's 100% true. So Dan, like one of the things which I often get asked, and this is kind of a very a very well-known thing, which like before being a person who's like applying to organizations, it can become confusing. So people do ask me that, okay, what are the different kinds of data science related roles in an organization? And what are the different kinds of skill set that you need for like different kinds of data science related roles? Like, does anybody need to know how to program really well? Does every data science role require you to be great at probability statistics? So how does that like role versus skill set map work in organizations?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I know that this is a very it can be like a pretty confusing question, especially if you're unless you're sort of been in the industry multiple times like I have. Like it's very sort of confusing to try to kind of navigate through your data science career, right? Like you look at the job post and they list like gazillion skill sets, and you're like, do I need certifications for each of the skill sets that are listed there, right? So I can tell you, based on my personal experience, that is really not the case. So so here's like a concrete example. So when I worked at the startup Cosmility, which eventually got acquired by PayPal, they the the director of data science had sort of like a vision in mind in terms of what are the talent that you want to hire. So he wanted like people who are going to be very hands-on, and this is where sort of like I got on board because I was prior to that I had like a consulting experience, so I was very comfortable in working with stakeholders, building models for them, delivering those sort of things end to end. And so he wanted someone who's going to be very hands-on with that. But then he also wanted someone who's a bit more like research oriented, and so that's where he would hire like PhDs to try to kind of basically lead like the latest sort of research in the ML tools that we're building for this startup, right? And so I would say that there's definitely some like variability to these aspects. It's like you don't. It's not really it's not necessary that like you have to have like strongest knowledge in programming and something like that. Because when I worked at the startup, one of the senior data scientists I worked with, she was not the most proficient in Python, but she was very strong with research, clustering, those sort of latest techniques and ML, and that was a strength that really allowed her to get the role and perform really well. So I would not say that like you have to be strong in every aspect. Rather, you just need to find the ones that you're really interested in, and then see what kind of opportunities are out there that really align with what your current strengths are. But if you're like starting out, right, and you just don't know what you need to do, right, so definitely like polish, cultivate your skill set in machine learning. Definitely get a foundation on statistics, and definitely brush up on either R coding or Python. But don't get too hung up in trying to know everything there is. I remember when I started out. Like I had this sort of false perception that, oh, you have to be able to use like Java programming language, like C++, C sharp. So I went about like learning all of those things, but later down the road I realized that at the end of the day I really need to know one language, and that's just Python. And I'm not trying to be all biased toward Python or anything like that, but it's just like focus on the things that are going to bring the most amount of like ROI. And it just so happens that like Python is just the most so widely used and also the easiest sort of language to pick up on, and so so I really just focus on that, and that's been perfectly fine in almost all the roles that I've had, whether it was working at a consulting firm in DC to the startup PayPal and also Google. I've used Python for the most part.
That is amazing, Dan. Also, like I've seen certain companies being interested in SQL as well, right?
Yeah, definitely. That's another profession. Like that's a very like I would say it's really an important skill set to have,
Mhm.
especially if you're pursuing like any type of like product data science role. So when I worked at a startup, more about Python programming language, but when but but for when I worked at Google, like SQL language was a must. I was using that almost on a daily basis, whether it was
Makes sense.
through data preparation, whether it's building like a production model.
Mhm.
We're using SQL as a way to get the data in the right format, and then
Yes.
funnel that into like basically a set of like a Python code that will eventually get the data prepared for modeling
Yeah.
process.
Makes sense. So, Dan, let's say that somebody doesn't have any kind of experience, right? Like most of the students who are coming out of grad school or coming out of undergrad do not really have experience, but they might have done some projects, or there's even a chance that they have not done any projects. So, what's the best way to, like find interview if you haven't had any experience? And what's the best way to, like build sort of like portfolio projects so that you can talk about what you have done in the space in data science, even though you have not done internships or any kind of work experience?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I know that it's a pretty common struggle for a lot of people out there. Like data science is a very exciting field. There's in a lot of people, especially nowadays want to kind of get into it. And it can also be somewhat competitive as well. You're always sort of competing against other people trying to, secure the same role. I would say that really if you if you are like starting out and you're trying to land your first entry level job as a data science, you just need to kind of break into the door, in the following way. So definitely like network with people. So I ended up getting my first, data science job through family's connection. So my mom, who's a hairstylist, happened to have a client who worked at this consulting firm in DC, Booz Allen Hamilton. He was like a director. And so through that connection, he's the one that set me up for an interview. And then that's how I ended up getting my first entry level job. But when I was doing, direct cold applying, I was getting rejections and stuff like that. And also, if you ever checked out my previous posts, sometimes I do bring out like how GPA is not a direct indicator of success and whatnot. Like I didn't have the highest GPA there was. Like I had 3.09 out of 4.0, just because freshman year I was a little bit of a bum, partied too much, deflated my GPA per se. Even though during the later years in my college, like I really got things straight and ended up getting really good grades and stuff like that. But it's not so much about like how good your academic records are. Like it's also just about like who you know. So really like put yourself out there, like attend these like meetups, attend like reach out to people on LinkedIn, like build the connections that you need in order to kind of get the opportunities that you're seeking, right? And the first entry level job does not necessarily have to be like a data scientist. Like you can start out as like a data analyst or any other roles that might be data related. I've certainly seen professionals who started out as like a non-data scientist, but because they were in a technical field, eventually they were able to branch into data science. So you don't necessarily have to make that one hop, to the role that you're looking for. And I've also had people reach out to me with not much experiences, being like, I really want to get into Google. I've applied multiple times. How do I get in? It's like a dream thing for a lot of people out there. But you also have to keep in mind you have to be really patient with yourself. Keep in mind that you can't necessarily just get the job you want right off the bat. Sometimes you have to sort of have multiple jumps. You know what I mean? Like before you get a car, you might get a bicycle. Before you get a bicycle, you might start with a skateboard. So start somewhere, and then work your way up to the dream job that you want. And along the way, like continue to just cultivate, like build your skill set, right? Build a skill set, build your portfolio, and that's just going to compound over time, and to a point where you can kind of get the dream job that you're seeking.
That's a really good point. Like, yes, Dan, like I really do believe that, it's one of the best ways I have also learned was through practical projects, working with professors. And
Yeah.
I just wanted to point this out because, like, I've done my undergrad in India, and I cannot tell you like how much of a like mental bubble that we have that grades is what's going to take you further, and like everybody is running in that rat race to get the most marks in your like undergrad. But that's completely not what's like what's important. That's what I believe in. That's something that have felt as like a first hand experience, because whatever projects that I had done, like any kind of, like even a freelance project or any kind of like remote work or internships or research, is what had been of more value than just the number, like, or the grade that you have on your mark sheet. So that's
Yeah.
100%, like, I totally believe that. So following that, right, like, Dan, how do we shortlist the companies that people are interested in? Like, how do you shortlist the companies as well as the roles when you're planning to apply?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and so it really depends on the stage of where you are with your career, and this is something that I work with clients all the time through like one-on-one coaching and stuff like that. So if you're like starting out, obviously you just really want to put yourself out there. Don't try to like find a, oh, I'm only going to apply to fake. More often than not, it's really difficult to get attention from recruiters, sort of thing, especially if you don't have much experience per se. So just put yourself out there, just apply to any roles that you see. And it is a little bit of a numbers game to an extent. And it's a little bit unfortunate that it is that way because, sometimes you might apply to 100 roles and you only get one response, right? But you do have to kind of play that game to an extent. Um, so don't think about like having like a finite set. But if you do eventually like get couple like offers, or you go through the interview process and then you eventually have like offers and stuff like that, this is when you can kind of think about, okay, you know what, like how I'm going to reduce which companies I really want to focus, like which companies I really want to work for, right? So there's a couple things that you have to sort of think about. So like is compensation, right? So compensation is the big one, especially if you're starting out. Generally speaking, you do want to perhaps kind of like you don't want to sell yourself too short. You know what I mean? Like you want to start at a salary range that's hopefully median or a bit higher, and you can definitely do a lot of market research. There's like payscale.com, there's glassdoor.com. There's a couple places that you can definitely do to kind of do the research in terms of what is a reasonable compensation. Definitely do not sell yourself short on that one. You can also look at like the culture assault as well, right? So the company that you're going to be working for, does it seem like they're going to train you up? Are they very like embracing of newcomers, and do they have the right sort of mentality and the right kind of environment where they're going to nurture you, right? They're going to be patient with you and realize that you are starting out and you have you're gonna need some mentorship, right? So do they have that sort of mentality? And that's very important, especially if you're starting out. And the third aspect is just, do they have the right kind of like culture, right? Like in a sense that like, are they just only focused on like the bottom line of company, right? Like the profit, right? Or do they really care about the mission that they have, right? And does it resonate with you? So those are like three things that, I would say three priorities that in almost every job that I always sort of look for myself, and also what I, tell to clients that they should think about these three things as they're trying to kind of navigate, which companies that they eventually want to apply and work for.
That's 100% correct, right? So Dan, like one of the things I wanted to, just mention this is like just going over some of the chat that we have, and like we have had some questions on the chat, and I wanted to just go over some of them. So Pallavi is asking a question that being a data scientist, like not entry level, how much business knowledge or like background is helpful to make a profile better?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I would say that as you sort of climb up, as you gain more experience in data science, like having like a business knowledge and skill set is ever more important. And here's what I mean. So when I was starting out as an entry level, a couple years ago, like I was more like kind of like a code monkey in a sense that like I didn't really have a sense of like what is a quality deliverable to a stakeholder, like what is the proper sort of business communication, those sort of things, right? Like because my only kind of point of references were through communication courses in college and stuff like that. And so like, I've focused mostly on the technical skill sets, programming languages and, going through the introductory of statistical learning. Apologize, got a little dark here. Sorry about that. The infamous sort of ISLR book, and kind of polishing up on statistics and those sort of things. But eventually, you will soon enough kind of realize that just only focusing on that. I'm sorry. Just only just only focusing on that can be very limiting. Just because what's going to happen is that it seems like I'm having some lighting issue today, because I have this flashlight and it ran out of battery. Let me see if I can.
I can see you well. Yeah, yeah. This is
My
much better.
position so my face
This is
isn't
much
all too
better.
dark.
This is much better.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry, everyone. Yeah. So, as I was saying, so like unless you really want to like kind of focus on just a pure technical role, right? Like maybe you want to focus just on like an R&D aspect of things, aspect of data science, then I think it's perfectly fine if you just continue to just do a deep dive on that. But if you want to perhaps have a bit more say in terms of the overall business decisions, so whether it is like, like you want to kind of decide, like let's just say you're given like multiple project options, right? And you want to think about, okay, should I invest my time on project X, Y, and Z, right? Obviously, you're going to have finite bandwidth and you're not going to be able to tackle all of them at once. In which case, you have to really think about, what is the like a ROI on the project that I'm going to invest. And that's something that I've written previously in my LinkedIn post before, where you have to kind of think about it a little bit strategically. So you might work on a project where where it might have a big potential, big like high impact, but it might take a lot longer than it really should to be able to deliver that. Versus you might have a project that might be much easier, but then in the same period of time that it would take you to solve a complicated project, you might be able to solve multiple of these easier projects, and thereby you're able to show to your managers and to like your team members that you're just able to like churn out as many projects as you can. And so if you really think about it, it makes a lot more sense to kind of focus on efficiency of like how quickly you're able to deliver projects rather than just focusing on, okay, I'm going to spend the next 9 months trying to focus on this project where there's a high chance that I might not be able to solve it. And so like having some business kind of sense about this makes you think about, okay, how am I going to kind of position myself? Like how am I going to prioritize which project to work on? And so this kind of sense requires some time to cultivate. It definitely helps to like obviously work with people who are a lot more experienced than you are. But over time, you eventually kind of get that, get this sort of knowledge and the skill set to be able to kind of help, with your data science profession.
That makes sense. Thank you so much. Okay, so one of the other things that I wanted to ask you is, again, like something which I've been asked a lot is how to build a stellar profile. Like, what can you do to just stand out of the crowd and showcase your like unique talent? So how do you figure that out and like how to build your profile around that?
Yeah. So I think the biggest mistake that a lot of people make, even for people who are experienced, is that they simply don't sell themselves the right way. So you can certainly use my LinkedIn profile as like an example, like how I provide job descriptions and stuff like that. But they focus too much on like what they did rather than like what they really achieved. So so suppose that like an example might be um, like I built a forecasting model for Google's like networking team, right? And I could just simply say, oh, I use Bayesian dynamic linear model as a way to do like a long-term forecast for 5 years, right? Um, that's all great and everything. And I've often seen type of resume where they list like, oh, I use XGBoost and achieve like an AUC of 0.90. And then like, they use like cross validation as a way to deliver this model to stakeholder. But that's not really the most important thing there. It's more about the ROI. What was a measurable, impact that resulted from what you delivered, right? And sometimes I get it. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to convert that into like dollar amount, right? Like, you built a fraud model, you help save like $30 million or something like that. And not all projects are like that. So this is where you can you can think about it in a different way. So it could also be a qualitative thing as well. So maybe it could be that because of what you produce, another team leveraged it to achieve Y, right? Or it could be that because of the dashboard that you built, there were 30 active users using it on a monthly basis. So there's still a way to kind of embed this sort of impact statement, and it's really important to do that because this is really what hiring managers are looking for. They're not looking for someone who knows like 57 machine learning algorithms. Like it's perfectly fine if you know 3, logistic regression model, random forest, and XGBoost, right? But the main question is that with what do you know how to be resourceful and deliver something that is key, right? And that those are the key attributes that really define a profile that stands out versus a profile that doesn't as much.
I cannot agree with you more on that, Dan. Like, I'm gonna share this experience which I have had. Like, I've like shortlisted some of the resumes. One of the major mistakes that people do is list down any and every possible machine learning algorithm that exists in the world on their resume. So it's full of buzzwords where they mention
Yeah,
that I was a data scientist at XYZ company, and then I have done like regression, linear regression, classification, this model, that model, XYZ. Like they're just gonna list down convolutional neural network, recurrent neural network, and just like all kinds of buzzwords. No, that's not the right way to go about it. One, as you mentioned, right? Like talk about what were you responsible for? Did you lead something? What was the change that you created? Like was it something that you created which was like a reusable asset? And
yeah,
how did that impact the team or like the overall performance of the team, etc.? And do not mention any machine learning algorithm. Like if you tell me that you're a data scientist, I assume that you would know how to like do machine learning models. You don't have to list down each and every algorithm that exists. That's one of the things which I have seen. And whenever somebody comes to me to like review their resume, that's one of the things I tell them, that do not put in buzzwords. It's not going to go through any like shortlisting. That's one of the red flags that recruiters are going to see, that you're gonna just list buzzwords out there in your experience.
definitely,
Yeah.
definitely. And even if you were to grab the attention from the recruiter, what you might get are questions involving that. So if you mention that CNN, well, expect to get questions on that.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's a great thing. Like I think we have like another interesting question which I wanted to get your attention to. So Himesh asks like, is there any need to do masters in data science for you to go ahead like in your experience?
That's a really good question. And that's something I personally debated myself when I was a college student. I was like, because this is like 2015, 2016, I'm in my senior year in college, in Bachelor's of Science, right? As an graduate, I was thinking to myself, maybe I should get masters, right? Or maybe I should apply to like the Berkeley, data science program, and then because of how because of the brand of like Berkeley, maybe it's going to help me like get the ideal jobs and stuff like that. Personally, for me, I didn't really see. I certainly saw the value in getting masters. Like you'd be learning some advanced regression models and go through like learn like machine learning and stuff like that. But I've always been more like a self-starter. And I've always loved to kind of design my own curriculum and my own blueprint to life.
Yeah.
And I felt that like it might be much better in the long term if I just like I should just start a job now, and then eventually kind of get to the ideal sort of job situation. And so I decided not to pursue masters at all. I mean, of course, like sometimes like I would have some itch here and there. I'm like, oh, like if maybe I want to be or if I really want to do like a research, right? Like
Yeah.
maybe I want to get into like a like R&D team that's coming up with like the latest sort of advanced techniques and machine learning algorithms, those sort of things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then maybe it might make sense for me to pursue a PhD, right?
Yeah.
Because they really help you do how do you solve a problem that hasn't been solved yet, and then think about it and come up with a solution that way,
Yeah.
But eventually, over the course of my career, I've realized that I personally enjoy more of kind of consultation. So taking business, these complicated business problems, and then using methodologies that have already been invented, but kind of refine it in a way that makes sense to apply to solve a business problem, right? And so like like so personally for me, like I learn pretty much what any what a typical like master student would learn through job, but actually gaining experiences and also getting paid at the same time.
Yeah.
So it really kind of boils down to you, like if you feel that you are in a much comfortable, better position if you were to pursue masters and then eventually pursue job, then I would go ahead and do that. But I
Yeah.
just want to let you know that that is not necessarily required. You do not
Absolutely.
need to have masters to get into the jobs that I want, that jobs that you want. I certainly did not. When I applied for the startup, they had like a minimum qualification, which is masters. Same thing
Yeah.
for Google's role as well too. It had minimum requirement for masters. But because my experiences in real life were really solid, that eventually led me to get spotted among, scouted among recruiters. And eventually it was the interview performance that led me to get the job that I want. And
Yeah.
so I just want to say it's not be all end all, like if you don't have masters, it's still ways to kind of, secure data
Yeah.
science jobs.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. So Hamish had a follow-up question that, and I was just going to add this on as well. That I did my master's in data science, and I resonate with what Dan said because there's no requirement for you to do a master's. Like there's literally like no requirement for you to do a master's either in data science or statistics or any of the fields. None of the jobs are going to say that okay, only if you have a degree you're going to get a job or not. And I want to like really give this personal opinion, Dan, like please like feel free to add your thoughts as well. So what I experienced in Colombia while doing my masters is my goal was to learn from some specific professors. That was my goal to do a masters. When
Yeah,
I was in my undergrad, I wanted to spend more time in academia because I was very fascinated by doing research. That's
yeah,
something which I was very fascinated by. So I
yeah,
was contemplating if I should go ahead with a PhD. And some of my mentors recommended that I should start with a master's. And if I did really like that, I should go ahead with a PhD. If not, I can just graduate with a master's. So
yeah,
I immediately like I had no work experience after my undergrad, and I continued for my master's directly after my undergrad. And my specific reason for doing masters was that I wanted to work with Andres Muller. I wanted to work with Alexander Andoni. Like these were
yeah,
two of the professors whose work really fascinated me, and
yeah,
that was the specific reason to apply to my master's degree.
yeah.
And if I were to objectively talk about the machine learning algorithms or the things that you learn, the curriculum that's going to be there, it's going to be talking about say neural networks. That
Yeah.
information is available online. If your core purpose is
Right.
only learn about data science and machine learning methodologies, that's something which you can get online. There's a lot of free resources or paid resources which you can find, but there
Definitely.
is an experience that comes with doing that degree, because you're connecting with certain kinds of folks. You're you're experience that university culture. So that is something which I felt was an addition to what I wanted. So make sure that like, just don't go for a master's because somebody else told you that, hey, you need that degree, you need that certificate. That's
Yeah.
not what is needed. You
Yeah.
have to have like a clear goal on what is your value add if you do a master's.
Precisely.
Because you're spending a lot on masters, so you need to have like a value goal
Precisely.
that
Right.
what's the add-on for me. If it's only like learning more ML algorithms, I'll share like 10 more resources which are free of cost for you to look for.
Definitely. Yeah,
Yeah,
you always have to think about, what is it are you gaining out of this, right?
exactly.
It's not just a sheet of paper saying that you got your master's, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I also think that it's a little bit of like because I had a friend who was sort of thinking about this. Should I pursue masters or should I pursue like a job? And his sort of logic was like, oh, I should get masters because in order to make myself a much more kind of stand out from the crowd, like I think it's better if I have masters, right? And in the long term, like if I have masters, then if there's any sort of like economic recession and whatnot, like people with masters are more likely to be able to have the job than people who don't have masters. I strongly disagree with that logic. I told him like, no, that isn't really not the
Yeah.
case, because the thing is that once you do have a job, it's more about your job performance and the degree to which what you like the academic the record you have, whether you have PhD or master's or undergrad, I don't think is the strongest sort of indicator in terms of your job performance, because
Yeah.
school is more like a model of what you could be doing in real life. But then when you're in real life, it gets fairly complicated.
Yeah.
You're exposed to all these different environments and situations that are not directly measurable through
Yeah.
school. School, you have these multiple choice questions and essays, but in real life, you're dealing with people.
Yeah.
And so when you're dealing with people, when you're dealing with stakeholders, when you're dealing with colleagues, you might have the smartest and the brightest mind there is. You might know, like, what, you might think, oh, like instead of using random forest, like let's use XGBoost to get the model performance and whatnot. But if you cannot convince your colleagues and people around you that this is the way to go, then all is at loss. And so
Yeah.
that's where I was sort of thinking, I think it's much better if I expose myself into real life sort of work first.
Yeah.
And if I feel like I need masters later down the road, I can always go back to school.
Yeah.
So that's how I sort of made my decision there. And I don't think I would necessarily pursue grad schools, just because I've already kind of experienced a lot of things that I think that I've wanted to experience in data science so far.
Yeah. Absolutely. So very interesting question that Mukund has here. So given the field like of data science is ever growing and changing, like how does one deal with like imposter syndrome?
That's a very yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. I just wanted to like your opinion on that.
Yeah, that's a that's a very good question. I think imposter syndrome is almost sort of the type of question that like almost everyone sort of experiences, especially in the tech industry, right? Like every couple months, there seems like a new algorithm that's coming out. It's like, how do you keep up with this, and how do you sort of present in a way where you project confidence?
Yeah.
So I would say that there's a couple things here. So first of all, as one of my undergraduate advisor once told me, she said that data science is just a rebranding of statistics. So regardless of how advanced data science will become, right, through through like advancements in computing environment and those sort of things, like the core skill set of what you need to know, statistics, and to large like machine learning, like those are still like it's not going to change. Like if you think about statistics, like key concepts like the central limit theorem, like Pearson correlation, like those sort of things have been invented decades ago. Yet they're often one of the go-to theories and techniques to think about almost on a daily basis, regardless of how far we have made in terms of like data science progress. And so, like, it's not so much about like you have to always keep up with the latest trends in data science. I certainly do not do that. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm not an expert in NLP, and I know there's a lot of development that's happening in NLP, but that is okay because for the type of problems I often end up working on, I don't need to do NLP. I focus mostly on time series forecasting. So like like pick out your niche and then just really do a deep dive on that, and don't try to know everything there is about data science. That is actually one of the like a common mistake. It's like a mistake that I personally made, where I'm like, okay, I'm going to be an expert in AI. It's a very broad thing. So it's like, oh, I'm going to know everything there is about computer vision. I'm going to know everything there is about like time series forecasting, NLP, and those sort of things. And sooner or later, I've sort of realized that that is just not possible. And first of all, as I sort of went through, like multiple projects in real life, I realized that no, I don't think I want to be an AI researcher. And I'd much rather just be like a data science consultant, and really focus on the methods that like I already know and then be able to reuse it. And I might kind of refine my techniques here and there. But for the most part, I'm very comfortable with the foundation skill set I have in statistics and machine learning. So like focus on those core skill sets, and then from there, incrementally, update your skills and your knowledge over time. Don't try to do too much, because otherwise you're going to feel overwhelmed.
Yeah,
Yeah, so that's my
absolutely.
suggestion there.
Absolutely. I've done that as well. Like initially in the field, I always had a fear of missing out, and I would just want to like, read about everything and anything that's there, and just
Yeah,
going through like all kinds of algorithms. There would be times when I'm just like, sitting hours understanding how recurrent neural networks activation functions are working, like how does,
yeah,
the
yeah.
mathematics behind things are working. But at a point you need to realize that you can't learn everything. So I've faced that as well, and I've started to learn like how to prioritize on what's important for me and what's going to help me upskill, even and like do better at my work. So
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely. And I
I
just want to
definitely.
actually point out something there. So this is where the longer you're in an academic field, to an extent kind of become a little bit distant in terms of what is actually required in the job on a
Yeah,
day-to-day
yeah,
basis. Because what happens is, in academia world, you're exposed to these white papers that give you exposure in terms of like the latest algorithms and stuff like that, right? But in reality, what happens when you're doing a job itself, oftentimes these type of models are not readily available to be able to apply in production environment. More often than not, you're going to end up using algorithms that have that you often might see in like Kaggle competition, like XGBoost, or like random forest, any sort of tree-based models, or even regression model, or let's just regression model. So you could learn like all these sophisticated algorithms, all these different variations of algorithms, but at the very core, the fundamentals that you have already been exposed to, they're not going to go away. The question isn't so much about how much you know, but with what you know, can you apply it, right? And that's one of the things that you really need to focus on. Like, it's much better to use one algorithm and be able to apply it in 12 different settings than just knowing 12 algorithms, but you only know how to apply in one setting. So work on versatility and less so on, oh, I got to know everything there is.
yeah, yeah, 100% on that. Also, Dan, like moving a little away from like the data science, technical kind of things. During interviews, one of the common things that people struggle with learning is behavioral questions and case study questions. So, what's the best way of like dealing these kind of questions, especially because like this is something I've read that behavioral questions or these case study questions become very focused on that company, and the companies are generally going to ask you case study questions which are specific to their product and like improving their metric, etc.
Yeah.
So how can one best learn these kind of sections of the interview?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's certainly a common sort of issue that a lot of candidates who are preparing for interviews struggle on. So starting with the behavioral aspect, um, so like you know, think about what are the core principles of what are the what are the core principles of this company, right? And you can certainly look up like the company's culture, and they have like a mission statement along with what are their values, right? From there you can think about personal stories and based on like career experience that really define how you demonstrate that value, right? So like do a little bit of research and then come up with the story that helps explain it. So when I like kind of started out, like nowadays, like if I go on interviews, I can certainly wing it, and I've done enough of these sort of situations where regardless of whatever behavioral questions they ask me, like I know like what story I need to tell right off the bat, because I've had accumulated enough experiences. Um, but if you're like starting out, perhaps, right, and you don't really know like how to go on about, let's just say like a question might be, like think about that one time when you failed and you learned through it, right? That's a pretty like common question. Like, how do you learn through your failure, right? Then, like it might make sense for you to kind of, take some time, like kind of journal, what are some concrete stories you can demonstrate there, right? And then like practice explaining that out loud, right? So you could do that for behavioral. And then for open-ended like business case problems, like so research is definitely like a must. You will not be able to address questions effectively like how do you measure success on Instagram or Facebook, Google, those sort of things, unless you really know at first of all, at a high level, what is it that they're offering? What is their mission statement? What's their product and services, right? And so if you look at one of like my YouTube videos on like data interview or any of my Medium content, data interview as well, like I often emphasize research as like a starting point, especially when you're preparing for interviews, because oftentimes candidates think that they can just sort of wing it. But then, unless they have the knowledge, the prior knowledge about, for instance, like, how many active users there are on Facebook or Google searching, those sort of things, it can be a little bit tricky to like be able to address these open-ended business case problems. So having some core knowledge from the get-go prior to the interview itself is really helpful. Now, when it comes to the actual open-ended case problem itself, right? So candidates will often sort of ramble because they don't know how to kind of go on about approaching these type of problems, and so you have to think about a structure. So this is where knowing like a couple frameworks can be helpful, and that's something that I talk about often as well. Like so going back to the example of like how do you measure success, right? Like a framework that you can think about is using the GAME framework. So defining the goal of that question, and then thinking about concrete actions that measure success, and then the third thing is metrics, right? So turning those actions into key metrics, and then the last one, E, in the GAME framework, stands for evaluate, which is considering the metrics that you have outlined, how are you going to actually pick out what is the success metric and what are the secondary metrics. So the more you're able to turn this open-ended case problem into much more like a structured format, the better you are in demonstrating that you do know how to solve these type of problems. And you don't have to have like 100% like soundness to like what you're saying. But what the interviewers are generally looking for is, can you take this big problem and not like fumble or ramble, but like turn that into like a structured response, right? So that's the key attribute that interviewers are often looking for.
That's great. And I think like one of the other questions that we had from the audience is like sharing some material for data interview preparation. So I will be sharing Dan's course that he has prepared, and that's something which I have gone through. Like I have just, as a friend, I have gone through Dan's material, and I find it very crisp. So one of the best things that I found about your material, Dan, is that um, you don't have ton of content. It's not, like overwhelming amount of content which people might not be able to finish. It's something which is very precise but really high quality. So that's something which I found to be like, something that will be very helpful for people who are trying to get into their data science interviews. And one last question that we have for today, Dan, is how do you talk about salary expectation once you have, gone through the interviews? One of the challenging things which generally people ask me is that interviewers ask them about what their salary expectation is,
Yeah.
and they do not know how to navigate that conversation because they don't want to lowball themselves, and they still don't want to, like put out a number which seems too extravagant that the company might reject them or something. So what is your take on that? Like, how do you, reach back to the recruiters about talking about salary, and how do you negotiate?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So this is something that I've sometimes worked with clients on, which is like, how they should go on about, navigating through this negotiation part, right? It can be a very sensitive thing too, So I would say, first of all, like know your worth, right? Like understand, what is the market value of the position, that you have just interviewed, and you can certainly use, you can go on like levels.fyi, Glassdoor, PayScale, use these three different platforms as a way to kind of gauge based on the role, the seniority, the location, what is a rough range of, what is a median, right? Like what's the 25th percentile, 75th percentile of, what you could expect in terms of compensation. And then kind of further break it down in terms of the base salary, the bonus, and like equity and those sort of things. So first of all, have those data points and just don't, like start out, citing a particular number blindly without really understanding what you're worth first. So once you've sort of done that research, from there, think about your interview performance itself. So based on, your like based on your personal, based on your sort of assessment in terms of how you did an interview, but also sometimes the recruiter themselves can kind of give you a bit of hint, in terms of how well you did as well too, right? So because interview performance is another way to kind of have that in your favor. So if you perform really well, and then you're sort of in a position where you can definitely offer, ask for something that's a bit higher than the median per se, right? So kind of gauge that yourself, and then from there, basically, negotiate, right? Don't just sort of settle down, with, don't just sort of accept the number that the company is giving you from the get-go. See if you can leverage it in some extent. So for instance, if they give you, let's just say like a starting base salary of like, let's just say $130,000 or something like that per year, in San Francisco. And I believe that's pretty typical. But that you perform really well in interviews, and the recruiter that you work with has sort of indicated that you are a strong candidate. Then from there you have some leverage in terms of this, right? And you can say, like I strongly believe in the company's mission, and I know I can like offer a lot, provide a lot of value. I would really appreciate it if we could perhaps, increase it, bump it up by, maybe like $5,000, $10,000 or something like that, right? And if they don't really nudge, then it's not be all and end all. There's still like another way to kind of work your way around this, and maybe you can ask for sign-on bonus. There are other different moving parts that you can kind of work around eventually toward the compensation that you're sort of seeking.
That's a great tip that you gave, Dan. Thank you so much. Like it's a good way to, like have a two-way conversation and discuss. And as you mentioned, it's a very good way to understand what's the company's typical pay, because just because like the FANG companies pay as much as they do doesn't mean like every other company can be matching that numbers. So like that's a great point, that you need to research about like what's the typical pay scale for that particular company, and how do they pay their data scientists or for other roles, and then make your case up there. So yeah, that's a great point. So yeah, thank you so much, Dan. Like that was the end of my questions, and I don't see any more questions in the chat as well. So yeah, thank you so much, and like I really hope people who have been watching this helps you on understanding how to like upskill yourself, how to perform well in your technical rounds, how to perform well in your case study and behavioral interviews, and also negotiating with the recruiters. So if you do have any other specific questions which we probably did not cover in this particular session, feel free to put that on the chat. This video will also be recorded and hosted on YouTube, which I will be sharing on my LinkedIn. So make sure that you can go ahead and watch that video later if you want to go over some of the concepts again. And if you do have any more questions, please feel free to put that on the comments of the video, and we will be getting back to that later. So thank you so much, Dan.
Awesome. I really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one, everyone.